Welcome to this week's episode of Courageous Leaders Changing the World. Super excited for this week's guest, Nic Gibson. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Cody.
Someone's never heard of you before. How do you explain who you are and what you do?
I currently am building a biotech company that maps and measures emotional state. Historically, people might know me from being an author, being a federal commissioner for mental health, or political advocate.
Okay, cool.
Nonprofit leader.
Yeah.
few things, depending on the chapter we want to zoom in on.
Love it. What's so the name of the podcast is Courageous Leaders Changing the World. What's the time that you've had to summon more courage than any other time?
Like a memory, a specific event. Yeah, I think my whole journey has been sort of an iteration of different leaps of courage I've had to take. I guess maybe in my most recent chapter, moving to California with a 10-page pitch deck and just no visa, no social security number, no investment raised, and just saying, all right, let's see if I can actually build this startup was definitely, that took a lot of courage, especially at the beginning of 2021, which is when I left. Basically the rule was you can't get back in if you leave. So that was like a no plan B whatsoever.
What's that journey been like to be able to step into the unknown to that degree?
I think that's what makes life worth living. You know, I think people spend their whole life trying to control something that ultimately we don't control, and we can't control, and we're not getting out alive. So I think it's better to sort of realize that when you're young, when you have youth, when you have energy, when you're in a phase of your life, to be able to kind of be more adaptable. I always say this to young entrepreneurs that ask me for perspective on things. And one of the pieces of advice I got all the time when I was starting out at 18, which was, you know, do the conservative, safe thing first, and you can always do that later. And I think that's the worst advice. I think you should jump in 2 feet first. When you're young, when you have the sort of ability to sleep on couches or stay in hostels if you need to, or, you know, make the sacrifices that I think every entrepreneur has to make. You're so much more equipped to do that when you're young. And so I think I'm all for take all the risks, you know, straight out the gate, and build that security over time, doing something that you really believe in.
How do we start to step into going beyond that, I guess, dynamic of needing to control things and step into risk more?
It depends on who you are. I don't think that you know, if only there was a silver bullet. I don't think it's not so simple. Yeah, I mean, if I was to generalize or try to find the universal theme that might be applicable to everyone listening, probably I think self-worth is really core to that. If you're not associating your self-worth with all the potential failures or all the potential successes, then I think it's a lot easier to emotionally find the space to take those risks. Because if you're constantly weighing your worth against what could go wrong or what could go right, you're basically going to be, you know, a train wreck pretty quickly. But if you have a really integrated state of self-worth that you know, you're filled up in different parts of your life, like your inner circle in yourself, with your relationship with yourself, knowing yourself. All of that stuff is kind of, you know, all the stuff you're pursuing is a bonus. It's not the core. I think this is where a lot of leaders go wrong, especially in my space now, tech. It's very volatile. There's huge risk. There's huge upside. You know, these are the companies that go on to have billion-dollar valuations, multi-billion, or, you know, in some cases now, trillion-dollar valuations. So if you're running away from something, you're going to go on a hell of a journey to have that be amplified, I think.
What's the journey been for you of like going from, you know, being more in a mental health space to being more in tech? What's been some of the things that you faced off within that?
Yeah, like from a core problem I'm solving perspective, it's been a really natural continuation, and that was really driven by wanting impact and wanting scale, and just feeling like if I was constantly the common denominator, whether that was my advocacy or my policy ideas or my content or whatever, like it was going to die with me. It wasn't going to change the world in 1,000 years. And that's what, I wanted to figure out how to solve the problem that could really lead to systemic change. So from that perspective, I'd say it was organic. From how the industry operates, that was like going from the first gear to the sixth gear pretty much overnight. Like there's no love. It's heavily volatile. Everyone's criticizing you. Everyone's judging you. You're under constant scrutiny. And not like someone didn't like your content. Like everything that you put forward is being heavily analyzed and scrutinized, especially if you're asking, people to hand over millions of dollars. And there's a lot of competition. And I guess you could say that's true in every industry, but tech is a race. You think about a startup in terms of you're going to raise capital. How many months of runway is that going to give you? And if you don't execute, perfectly, then you're basically constantly toying with the edge of death. So it's a constant reminder. And so that's been an adjustment. I think I am more of a realist than I've ever been.
What were you previously?
I mean, I was always like somewhat of a realist, but I definitely like my day was probably filled with a lot more nicety and, and love. As a CEO of a startup, you're dealing with all the problems. You're dealing with numbers all the time. You're dealing with investors and stakeholders and clients, and basically the buck stops with you. So it's like I think Elon Musk said it, it's the sum total of all the stuff other people don't want to do. That's basically your job. So it is very different to traveling the world, talking about love, getting to inspire people from stages. Yeah, for sure. My days look a lot different. But I also see this as a gateway, if you will, to be able to do that again, but at a much, much bigger scale. And I'm just putting in the work right now to build the platform that will enable that.
What's your vision for the platform then?
Well, the tech itself is, has the capacity. So what it is for context, we use wearable data, and basically we've trained that data through restructuring it to read emotional state. So it's a world first tech. You've got other technologies that are trying to do this through kind of facial recognition or even EEG monitoring, but this is high fidelity, real time data that really does have the ability to transform pretty much any industry it touches. Right now, we're focused on team performance and management whilst we go through the FDA process. And once we have the FDA clearance, the clinical trials that we're doing on the tech basically are for classification of software as a medical device. So the claims that we're testing are things like InTruth can be used, which is the name of the company, as a diagnostic tool for depression, for generalized anxiety disorder, for mood disorders. So that would be a huge industry pivot from something like the DSM-5, which psychologists are currently referring to do a mental health diagnosis, which I've never believed in because it's so subjective. It's like those tests, you go to the GP and they're like, have you felt stressed in the last 7 days? It's like, can you really hand someone antidepressants off these answers? Because it's so generic and vague and subject to opinion, The example I give is like, imagine in 2025, you go to the doctor and you think you have blood pressure problems and you say, all right, doc, I think I have high blood pressure. And the doctor says, well, okay, Cody, what do you think it is? And you're like, I don't know, 200 and 150. And they don't put a blood pressure cuff on you. There's no objective measurement of this. And they just take your word for it. And they're like, sounds good. Here's some meds. This is basically how we treat mental emotional health. So I think InTruth will be highly disruptive when we cross that threshold into FDA, TGA approval, and it'll start to actually be used in this really clinical context. And I'm excited for that. But even on the consumer side, the more people that use the technology, we have the ability to build basically the world's largest emotion data set. And what I get most excited about, and maybe what's truest to my background, because I'm not a technologist, I'm a non-technical founder, is what we're going to do with that data. How we're going to use that data to drive, public health, policy reform, thought leadership at a really sort of powerful level. That's the stuff that really drives me and where I see my full potential as founder of this company is going to be able to come online.
How important is ensuring that data stays in the right hands then to you?
Yeah, it's the number one question our consumers ask, and rightly so. So we build, basically there's a way of building architecture which is either on device or in cloud. So we it's called federated learning, on device processing. It basically means that on device there's all of your identity data and all of the interesting contextual data is processed on device. And then the only thing that gets fed to the server, which is what's hackable, is the learning. So you can imagine, like, we have a mothership that has all these small baby ships, and those baby ships are feeding up the information to the mothership so the mothership can become more intelligent, but none of your data sort of goes off device. So as long as you have your device, you have your data. That is the infrastructure that I believe in. It's, amazing how many companies don't build this way. And so the question is why? And largely it's to do with shareholder value, because if you have a whole bunch of identification data that's centralized and I can know this is Cody, this is his age, this is his demographic, this is where he lives in the world, these are his interests, this is his emotional state. Obviously, that's very valuable data to be able to on-sell to brokers and all kinds of things, even to drive your user behavior on our platform. You can use that data to up the ante in all kinds of ways. So for me and for InTruth, and really for the whole team, it's been a journey to find people that believe in our mission of data sovereignty, which is not commonplace at all in Silicon Valley. It's actually like the more centralized data you can get, the better, and the more valuable your company is going to be. And it can be a dichotomy, to be honest. Like I have an altruistic nonprofit background, and I'm in an industry which is about maximum profit, maximum return for shareholders, and there's no way to cut corners. You need millions of dollars to build what we're building.
What's been your personal journey with holding the line of that then?
I'm tough. And to me, like, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's a result of what I've seen in my previous roles or what it is, but I'm just not motivated as much by money as I am impact. Like, money's great. I love building valuable things. I love nice things in life, but the money you see in tech, if someone's worth 100 million or a billion or 10 billion, kind of at a certain threshold, does your life really change that much? It's, for me at least, that's not what would continue to drive me. But that's also not what investors want to hear, So I, as the CEO, I have a function to serve them, and that's my responsibility. So on a personal level, which was your question, I don't struggle to hold that line. I don't feel corruptible in those ways. As the CEO of this company, I have to remain humble and open-minded to what a win-win is going to look like across the board. And I'm committed to finding a way that is a win for shareholders, a win for our consumers, a win for humanity in general, because we don't want huge databases of emotion data that's fed through AI and used to sort of mass surveil the population. I think that would be highly dystopic. But we also want to build something really valuable.
So you have like a very strong focus on like systems thinking. How does someone start to develop more of a focus on seeing things on a systemic level, not just like a short-term focused level?
It's a good question. I mean, you could look at it statistically and say that statistically about 1% to 2% of the world are systems thinkers, and it's correlated usually with IQ. So, I don't want to sound elitist in that way, but I don't know if everyone can be a systems thinker, and I think that that's fine, because we also need some people that aren't thinking about how to change the world every day and losing sleep over that. We need people that are in the world making our economy run in different ways, right? So I think it's important to acknowledge strengths and to try to live a life in alignment with those strengths. And it's okay if you struggle to think in terms of systems design or complex systems thinking. And that's a double-edged sword. Like, even when you can, it can actually create a lot of suffering to see things in the way that I see things, because you're basically analyzing things all the time. Like, you can't stop solving problems, and that's been, my own journey of managing my mental health. But for those that maybe do have the propensity to think in systems who aren't. I think, it's interesting. I recently hired someone I went to school with as one of our C-suites, and it was really unexpected and just synchronistic. But we went to an arts academy that was kind of for, you needed to have a certain IQ and a certain level of talent to get in. And that was our grade equivalent of grade 10 to 12. And a big part of that curriculum, we did the International Baccalaureate. But the specific way that this academy taught the IB was very much about learning how to think. So we were taught a lot of mental models that helped us not rote learn, but actually how to solve problems, how to reverse engineer problems, how to use first principles thinking. And it's been really interesting to hire Chris. We hadn't seen each other for 17 years. But the way we solve the problems, even though he has a very different role, he's overseeing tech and product, and I'm the CEO. The way we approach problems is very, very similar, and I think that that's a result of the mental models we were given at 15, 16, 17 that helped sort of frame how to think about a system and reverse engineer it. And so to get into the practicalities. And a lot of amazing entrepreneurs reference first principles thinking. Elon Musk talks about it all the time. Basically, you think about the end goal and you just try to eliminate as best you can all your predisposed ideas of how to solve that problem. And the first challenge is to get really specific about the problem you're trying to solve. So for us, we want people to understand their emotions. We're trying to solve emotional loneliness. We're trying to solve people's emotional incapacity, basically. And it was that thinking that had me lead a nonprofit for 7 years, serve as a commissioner, and also start a tech company. So you can see when you use first principles thinking, the application is so dynamic because what you're chasing is how do I solve that problem in the most efficient, most resourceful, and most accessible way. So my first company, which was looking at community development, basically, and correlating community development with mental health outcomes, scaling that as far as I could, then realizing people in political positions have a lot of influence over that industry because they're in charge of funding, and then going to the other side of that paradigm, I guess, from community to federal government. What came out of that for me, applying that first principles approach, was you've got a lot of people that deeply care but don't have impact, and you have a lot of people whose decisions make impact but they don't deeply care. So what we really need is a marriage between power and love in that way, and we need highly scalable solutions that are also very personal. And it was that thinking that led to technology design and eventually led me to ask the question, well, can we even measure emotion? If emotion's at the center of this, and we couldn't. It was all subjective surveys and opinions and anecdotal data. So no industry can be transformed on soft data. You need hard data to transform an entire industry at the level of a system down. And so I realized what was revealed to me through applying first principles thinking was this was a data problem. And so we need better quality data. So you can see through that process how, areas that maybe you would never have previously pursued or identified with suddenly become available to you through asking the right questions. It wasn't, am I an engineer? Which, if I was trying to think about things in such a linear way, I never would have gone on this journey because I can't, or everyone can code these days. But when I founded the company, no one, I couldn't code. And so, yeah, that's like a beautiful example. But for someone I was educated with, it's amazing how much that education and those mental models have withstood the test of time through both of our very, very different careers.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. A lot of the work that we do is, getting people to start to think in models.
Yeah.
Because it starts to allow people to be able to start to open up, to be able to see the systemic nature that's playing out for people. So I love that.
Mm.
What's been your journey with that emotional loneliness? obviously that's going to be a lot more heightened if there's only 1% of people that have systems thinking. So what's been your journey with that?
Like personally?
Personally. And then also then how much do you see that playing out in the tech as well?
Tech world?
As in the technology that you've created.
Like my data? Or just for people?
For your experience with it, number one. And then also like how much is that showing up that people are experiencing that emotional loneliness based on all of the people that are using your tech at the moment? Okay,
so for me, in my journey of that, I think I went through like the first probably 27, 28 years of my life not realizing I was different. So there was like a peaceful naivety. And I think that what I've journeyed the last 5 or so years has really made that quite clear. Because when you start, I mean, you would know this, right? When you start leading a team, especially a team that's growing and scaling, you have to meet all your deficiencies, and all the things that are obvious to you that you kind of assume are obvious to other people start to reveal themselves, right? And so it's been a huge journey. And yeah, probably the loneliest I've felt in leadership. I've had different chapters of loneliness. I think we all have, whether that's, heartbreak or life transition, moving countries. But yeah, this kind of loneliness I think is quite different. And I think like when you're building something, if you're in build mode, the way I sort of see it is there are people that will get you, but maybe you haven't opened those doors yet. So you kind of have to earn, you have to go through the journey to earn, those relationships in a way, just because it's hard to connect with people that are at that 1%. When you're focused on kind of building that initial traction and that initial success, I think it kind of comes through the journey. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to sort of share on that. It's hard. I think it'd be harder to not try to see out that full potential. I think that would be a different kind of pain, but a worse pain. This gives me a purpose and a focus that kind of keeps me very disciplined and functional, which I need that. Like when that's not in my life, that's a way worse situation than any kind of difficulty of feeling misunderstood in creation. That's an easier emotional experience for me personally. And then really like understanding who wants to see you win. I think that also reveals itself. And it reveals itself, by the way, through the really hard times. It reveals itself the months that you don't know how you're going to make payroll that month, or you're not yourself because you're really under a lot of pressure. And the people that have grace and can kind of see underneath that stress, I think it's hard to know who those people are until you're really going through those difficult times. And there's been a lot of that, a lot of shedding in my journey the last 5 years, which I'm actually really grateful for. Maybe I've swung a little bit too far the other way, which is I find it hard to trust people. And not because people aren't great. I think people are good. It's just not everyone has the capacity to be trusted with certain things. And that's fine. Like it's not a personal attack. It's just the reality. So there's that. Loneliness as a world. I mean, InTruth data aside, 80% of the world's dealing with loneliness. And I think that number is growing. And we could go down many rabbit holes of how tech is influencing that, not just social media, but the actual dynamics of landmark broker deals that happened about 10 years ago, which created, basically that facilitated echo chambers and algorithms, and what that then taught tech companies about what makes people tick and the level of data that brokers have on you. The average data broker has about 70,000 data points on you. Try to write down 70,000 data points on yourself. 70,000 like highly personalized pieces of information. Most people couldn't come up with 10. So that just gives you an idea of how powerful these engines have become. And I believe that is 100% driving loneliness. And if we're growing a generation on AI companions with no like feedback, literally no mirror neurons, no risk taking socially. And a lot of these models are designed to be sycophantic intentionally because it's addictive. That's really problematic. So I think I'm very passionate about that, and I think it's a good conversation to have to make people aware, especially parents. Right? My advice would be, these founders in Silicon Valley don't let their kids use their products, and that's everything that you need to know in my opinion. Right? So tech in general, I'd say, is facilitating an increased level of loneliness that was there pre-pandemic, but it's accelerated. In our data, it's an interesting question. So the way we train our model, the model that you would use, for example, if you were to be onboarded to InTruth now, has been built, the core model has been built off what's basically called a normative sample. So it's people that have gone through screenings to make sure that they're healthy physically, they're not on medication, they're not suffering from any active mental illnesses. So it's interesting to see when someone is using InTruth where their baseline sits comparative to a healthy population. But because we haven't gone through these clinical trials fully yet, I need to sort of be careful around the clinical claims that we can make. So I just want to caveat that. But we will produce all of this research basically as and when we go through these trials next year. But you can definitely see, we've used the tech, for example, in trainings and things that we've run, where people are sitting compared to the universal baseline is always interesting. Like people with anxiety, you're going to see that they're higher on the circumplex model. Like they're running negative positive valence that's above a normative population. People that are dealing with depression, usually their arousal's lower, and you can see that all on the model. I don't think we've scaled enough to have kind of big claims around what global data sets look like. That is definitely something I'm interested in as we launch to a consumer market and hopefully start to have, millions of people's data to refer to and to be able to segment that data, male, female, age groups, countries, occupations, all kinds of demographic data that we'd be able to see what is really going on. I'm very curious to see how Gen Zs compared to the Alpha Gen, compared to millennials, compared to Xs, what does their data look like? And I would make sort of some pretty strong correlations around how consumption of digital media is affecting that.
What do you see, I guess, with the rise of tech occurring? What do you see happening with consciousness and the integration between those two things?
Such a good question. It's such a big question because, first of all, define consciousness. I feel like when we say consciousness, we're kind of meaning, I'm assuming, like the human soul, right? Yeah. And the expansion of our evolution from maybe a more spiritualist's perspective. So I just want to put a pin and say, we don't know what consciousness is, but for the sake of semantics, let's go with that. I think biological intelligence is under threat. And you see, money moving so fast towards that reality. And what I mean by that is becoming transhuman, augmenting our biology, augmenting the way our brain can interface with the computer through brain-computer interfaces. So I talk about this publicly because I'm quite passionate about this. I think the line in the sand, if we want to preserve organic human life, the line in the sand needs to be no actual merging of the brainstem with a computer. Because the way I kind of see it is the way AI is evolving and will continue to evolve is kind of in stages. We had the introduction of large language models, say in 2022, 2023. Then now we're seeing the uprising of agentic LLMs. So large language model systems that can analyze things and make decisions so that they now have the ability to be agentic. And if you play this all the way out, I think eventually, and what you're seeing, by the way, so we need to talk about why this is likely based on how people are being primed right now. There's amazing research, some research that just came out of Stanford, which is showing physical brain shrinkage, like in MRI scans as a result of using large language models. So the brain's actually atrophying. And you'll notice it. Like if you are currently using Claude or Gemini or GPT for your email sequencing or whatever, try to do it without it and see how impacted your attention span and your ability to focus has become. So it's like not using muscles at the gym. Like the brain will atrophy as well. My concern is you and I have had a world before it. And so it's like muscle memory. Like if we wanted to stop using it, our ability to return to sort of longer dopamine cycles and attention span is a lot greater than a kid that never had that baseline developed. And that's my biggest concern, because what the risk is, and by the way, we're seeing for the first time in history since 2010, the reverse Flynn effect. The Flynn effect is when grandchildren historically have always had a higher IQ than their grandparents. In 2010, with the introduction to the iPhone, we're seeing the opposite. So we're seeing IQ go backwards for the first time in history. And that was the introduction of the smartphone. And it's not that the smartphone is literally making you dumb. It's that you're not retaining information in the brain. And brain volume is correlated with the amount of information you can retain in your brain. So if you're outsourcing everything, your brain will atrophy. So that's the risk, right? So what do you think the next technological solution is going to be? Oh, you can't think for yourself. You can't make decisions. Here's a brain-computer interface, right? It can just hook you right up, and when you first go through that process, you'll be able to think, and the BCI responds to your thoughts. So it'll be like kind of like telepathy. As that BCI has been in your brain for long enough, it will know your patterns to the point that it's going to know what you're going to think before you think it. And then the next level is it'll be agentic. So it's going to know what you think before you think it, and it's going to be able to make decisions based on that information. So this is what I call putting the soul in a box. Basically, if you assume that God's greatest gift to us is free will, that is the death of free will. That's a place where basically you're not being given choice anymore, because you have an AI system that's basically taken over your consciousness and is making all those decisions on your behalf. And your brain's atrophied so much that, you can't, even if you wanted to, the ability to handle the rapid stimulation of what the world's become, it just can't keep up with it anymore. And I believe that we need to evangelize this cause heavily now, because this acceleration path is going to happen so fast and no one is doing anything about it. Like if you look at shareholder incentives in tech companies, like it's all about maximum profit. And the excuse that everyone's using is, well, if the US don't do it first, then China will do it. So it's become nationalistic. And it's sort of like a get out of jail free card of some kind to say, oh yeah, well, there will be a lot of damage, but it's going to happen anyway. So, what we need to do is actually come together as a world. The people need to understand what this could look like. And I do hope and believe, I think, that more people wouldn't want that future. If they could actually see the potential, more people would choose against it. And that's the kind of pressure that is required, I think, to prevent that from playing out fully. And there are levels of spiritual contemplation that are really required in that. Like, do we value organic life? Do we value the way humans have evolved for billions of years? And if we do, we should protect that, and we shouldn't try to augment it. But yeah, it's a big conversation. I mean, our IQ comparative to AI systems in the next 50 years is we're going to be like ants. I personally can't get into the headspace of why that is compelling. When you have a species like humanity and we have the world that we've created, why do we want to forfeit that to machine? I can't understand this, but I think maybe because I do have a core belief in God, there's a connection there that for some technologists there's just not. And talking to a super intelligent AI, maybe the fantasy is like the ability to talk to a version of a demigod, and that's kind of what's driving them.
Yeah, I saw this thing on, what was it? What's the English comedian?
English comedian.
That's not very specific.
That's just very vague.
I can see his face. God damn it. Anyway, he's talking about, we've created AI in like our image, and if we go into the Bible, we're created in God's image. So all that we're doing is really, really recreating what we perceive as God is. Mm-hmm. It's this interesting kind of dynamic that plays out of how already so many people like outsourcing their power to it on such a degree that their brain is shrinking.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me. I'm curious about what your take is for how to be able to bring conversations like this forth without stepping into fear-based conversations.
Yeah, I think it's not about any kind of like at a certain level of awareness. There's always things that you could be afraid about, right? But the whole purpose of awareness is so that it can come back into your control. Like that is the purpose of generating awareness. So I just want to make that really clear. It's not about fear mongering or saying, oh my God, AI is going to, come and kill us all. Like it's about understanding the potentialities. And I think part of that understanding is we're living in a time that's so exponential, we cannot compare it to a previous time. And that's the biggest difference, because sometimes when I have this conversation with people, they'll say, we've been through different changes. We went through the Industrial Revolution. We went through kind of the reorchestration of the world post World War II. And yeah, that's all true. And the acceleration curve that we're seeing right now is faster than what your brain is actually designed to be able to handle. And historically, we are really good at reacting to things, and we're not great at looking forward and saying, we want to prevent that potential from happening ahead of time. But that's really what we need to muster, I think. And it's not necessarily about going to the streets and, protesting, although, maybe there'd be a time and place for that. I think the greatest act of rebellion is choosing to retain your own critical thought, choosing to retain your own attention span. That is a discipline that is within all of our control right now. Like if you are a writer that can't sit and write for 3-4 hours anymore because you've outsourced it all to an LLM, your liberation is going to come through reclaiming that ability. And there are so many technologists out there that are just saying, oh, we'll just come up with new problems to solve and just make peace with the fact that you don't need to write anymore, you don't need to paint anymore, you don't need to whatever. But I really disagree. I think these forms of expression, it's not just about the talent of the expression, it's about the mental acuity to be able to think for yourself. And that's the boundary that I think everyone should think about in their own life. Because if you overstep that boundary through carelessness and through convenience, or feeling like you have to be competitive and you can't write as quickly as the LLM can or whatever, if that's your frame of mind, then you're eating into your own sovereignty, really. Like you're becoming dependent on something external to you. And that's bad in any situation, not just tech. I mean, think about, a person that has control over you, or, money or drugs or whatever it is, like that's never a road that leads to an empowering place. And I think for technology, we all just have this big blind spot because it's so addictive. And it's designed to be addictive. And you'll feel the anxiety if you don't have your device on you, for a few hours. But that's not normal and it's not healthy. It's just been normalized. What a lot of people don't have the visibility over, which amazing kind of whistleblowers and things talk about now openly, is that these platforms are designed to do just that, because it's your attention that equals success for that company and equals profit. But that doesn't mean you should just succumb to it. So when I say awareness, it's not It's not about fear mongering. It's about setting healthy boundaries in your own life and having your own sense of freedom and critical thought. And then from that place, using technology as a tool. It's a very powerful tool. I'm not saying to not use it, but it will lead you to a place of helplessness if you become completely dependent on it for everything. And I think just at a sort of core level, that's never a good thing.
How do you see emotions playing into this then? Because, you know, a lot of people, when they're in that addiction to something, they're in the avoidance of the feeling of it. How do you see that those things can come together?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we talk about a lot as a team. Like, how do we prevent people from being sort of anxious about their data? And, you know, the really honest answer is there's no perfect way to solve that. There are definitely a lot of design considerations that you can implement to make it less of like a reward system, and more just, you know, a mirror that's there when you want it. Like, you got to ask as a company, what are we optimizing for? Are we optimizing for people to be on our platform 10 hours a day? Because that's what Meta's doing. I don't think that's necessary for InTruth. I think you could check it once a day, you know, and that would be plenty for you to understand yourself better. And so that's a design principle. And then also how you drive value broadly as a company. Because if you're not paying for a platform, you are the product, you know, that famous quote. So the fact that you can use Meta's platform for free means they've got to extract more of your attention to advertise to you, to feed that commercial model. So we've thought about all of that differently from the onset. And I think that will play, you know, a big role, I hope. I can't imagine why, based on how we've designed InTruth, why someone would be sitting there and looking at it for 10 hours a day. Like, even some of the latest considerations, we're introducing 24-hour metrics that will be given to the user at the end of the day with a couple of prompts to do some reflection. So the hope is that we're optimizing for that person to maybe spend 20 minutes with InTruth a day, with the goal to help them become more emotionally conscious, more emotionally regulated. And I think something like this is needed because so many people are dysregulated. Like, in an ideal world, everyone would just learn mindfulness, right? But because the speed of technological adoption is happening so fast, I think we need a technological solution, unfortunately, to intercept. And something that people are already doing and using. Like, 1 billion people wear wearables. It's amazing. You know, they only really took off 5-6 years ago. Now 1 billion people are either wearing an Apple Watch or a Garmin or an Oura Ring. So there's a lot of real estate there. And I think, although some people complain, oh, the sleep score makes me anxious, I personally feel, as a net impact, the introduction of step counters and like sleep scores, I think that's been net positive. Because if you think back to culture before the sleep score was introduced, culture was like grind, get up at 4 a.m. any cost, like don't sleep. I feel like the data has actually influenced, it's really important to get 8 hours of sleep. Sleep hygiene is really important. And it facilitated balance back into a really unbalanced conversation and gave people an individual ability to measure that in their own lives, because a lot of people think they sleep well and they don't. And, you know, a subset of those people will become anxious about using it. A subset of those people will throw their Oura Ring out and say, fuck this data, it doesn't know anything about me. You know, and you know, but I think a large percentage of people will take it on and do things to improve their sleep. And that's a great thing. And I hope InTruth is used in that same way.
I love that. Yeah, I've definitely gone on that journey of
sleep data. Not when you're a new parent. I think that's the one. Do not wear an Oura Ring when you have a newborn baby.
No, I think it was like 2021 or something. I got rid of it. I was just like, all right, I've got enough feedback on my sleep. It's okay now. But it also was one of the things that allowed me just to reflect so much more. Like, I'm huge on creating feedback loops on everything so that you can actually start to become aware of what's actually playing out.
Exactly.
What's in kind of wrapping up this episode, what's the final words that you would have for the listeners in terms of, I guess, shifting their relationship with tech moving forward? Because that's been a common theme for this podcast.
Yeah, for this audience, I feel like all you guys are really into personal development, right? And probably at some point in your life, you've sat down with a pen and paper and asked the question, like, what do I actually want for my life? What do I want for my business? What do I want for my family? What's that vision? And I think do exactly the same process, but really put a lens over your tech usage. How much time are you actually spending on it? And what's that, is that actually the vision for your life? Is that the example you want to set for your kids? Because if they see you sitting, on your smartphone for hours a day, like I see it with my niece, by the way. Like, she's never had screen time. She's almost 2. She doesn't know what a phone is in that sense. Like, she's never used one. But if I'm on my phone around her, the stimulation from the screen is like crack cocaine to her. She'll run at it. She wants it. So we shouldn't underestimate that. And I think, to anyone that's motivated by wanting to be a good example, you should use that as part of your contemplation. And then on the positive side, how tech can be used really as a tool, not as a numbing, mechanism or a way to outsource your thinking, but all this intelligence that we're being introduced to and that we'll continue to be introduced to in literally abundant ways over the next few years and beyond. That is access, unprecedented levels of access to intelligence. You can be using it to build, 20 new businesses. No longer do you need to think about this kind of linear, I'm going to have one business and that's it. Like, AI means that you can have a website, a voice agent, sales ops systems, an app, all in a weekend. Like, that's now, once upon a time you would have had to raise hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to do that. So I think on the positive side, get inspired by what's possible and really think about how you can be constructive with it. Because my dream is that this all leads us to a place where we have more abundance of time to do things that are more human, not to be slaves to technology. Like, if AI is doing its job, we shouldn't have to do mundane medial tasks anymore, and we can replace that time that we were once, the average person's getting paid $50 an hour to do something medial and paper pushing at a desk. You can spend that with your lover, your family, your kids, your friends, traveling the world. That's what we should all aspire to. And I think we each need to hold that vision for our own lives so that we can actually create that as a world. You vote with your dollars at the end of the day. If you're feeding these platforms with your money or your attention, you got to understand that you're feeding into the world that will be created when those companies, have all the control or not.
Cool. I love that. What's the best way for people to find you?
You can find me, speaking of tech, you can find me on most platforms. My Instagram's Nic Gibson _ or my LinkedIn's Nicole Gibson.
Great. Cool. This has been fun.
Thanks, Cody.